All right, welcome to the third episode of UFC Casual Podcast, MMA Casual Podcast. I got my own name wrong. There hasn't been a lot of MMA or UFC news. That's what we're usually covering. We've had some great episodes on that, what's to come for 2023. But we wanted to have a special episode just for basically our GOAT list. What we love about MMA, who are our top fighters, from exciting fights to the most exciting fighters, to personal favorites, and of course our top 10 list. So Danny, introduce yourself like always and let's get this started.
Yep, so what's going on, everyone? Happy holidays, Happy New Year. Danny Rodriguez here on the MMA Casual Podcast. So like Aramis was saying, this time of the year in the UFC, really every year, that December to January time frame, it's very dead as far as MMA goes. I know there was like a Bellator versus Risen event this past weekend, but there's not a whole lot going on, especially not in the UFC. So that's why we kind of wanted to think a little bit outside of the box,
still get some content out there.
Right.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned Bellator, that's one of my, I'm not going to say, resolutions for 2023, but this year I definitely want to get a little bit out of the UFC as far as like being a fan of mixed martial arts. I like bare knuckle, but I definitely want to see the one a little more. I want to see Bellator a little more and just,
Yeah, and really now more than ever, they're making it easier because now one has a deal with Amazon, so if you have Amazon Prime, the fights are free. I think they're hosting their first US event this upcoming year, but as we all know, Ultimate Fighting Championship since 1993, 30th year right now in 2023.
Huge, gonna be a huge year.
And so with that being said, why don't we look back and start off with our top 10 fighters of all time.
Let's do it. And I think that was one of the biggest things I was telling my followers, and we're growing the YouTube page now. We got 33,000 on TikTok. We're live on TikTok now, so thanks guys. Hi Hunter, by the way, said he's a big fan. So one of the things we want to do is just start off strong, and we're gonna go straight into our top 10 fighter list, which every time I go into it on TikTok, I get a lot of comments, a lot of criticism. I made a video yesterday where basically I had like a baby filter on, and I was like, oh, McGregor fans, when McGregor's your favorite fighter, and then I had like the Chad chin for John Jones is your favorite fighter, and everybody had so much to say about it. Everyone's like, oh, if you like John Jones, you're a casual, and it was fun. So now let's make it clear, me and Danny are gonna go straight through our top 10. So Danny, if you want to start us off.
All right, so this was actually a pretty hard list to make. Number 10, surprisingly, I'm going to go with the best heavyweight of all time, Stipe Miocic. I think he solidified himself with the most title defenses at heavyweight, which is not a lot. I think it's only 3 or 4. No-brainer, I think, to have him on a top 10 list.
I think it's fair.
Yeah. And now, number 9.
Keep going down your list, yeah.
All right, number 9, Kamaru Usman. Prior to 2022, he was the number 1 pound for pound. He held that position for, I want to say, a couple of years.
Yeah.
He definitely showed why he's one of the greatest welterweights of all time. I wouldn't say he's better than GSP, but, if he continues fighting and, gets the belt back and defends it a couple more times, he's definitely making his case. Number 8, I'm going to have to go with one of the double champs that the UFC has had, Daniel Cormier. Amazing wrestler. He was an Olympian. He definitely defended both belts in some good fights, some not so much. He definitely has some classics. Unfortunately for him, he had 2 fighters that were his kryptonite, John Jones at light heavyweight and then Stipe Miocic at heavyweight. But ultimately, he's landing number 8 on my list. Number 7, we're going to go a little bit older. This one was kind of, out of left field, but I'm going to have to go with BJ Penn. I think when you think of these fighters and their careers, it's important not to, think about how things ended. Unfortunately, BJ Penn had like one of the worst career-ending streaks that any fighter has had. I think he lost like 8 out of 9 of his last fights. But while he was in his prime, he was amazing.
Yeah.
He fought at lightweight, fought at welterweight, challenged for both titles, was a lightweight champion, and then the welterweight champion beating Matt Hughes, I believe. I think he got soundly defeated by GSP, but he beat Matt Hughes, if I remember correctly. If not, then I'm definitely a casual. But he was the greatest mixed martial artist up until that point, and so
his era, he was definitely up there.
So I think he's definitely making a top 10. Number 6, and now that I'm looking at it, the only female fighter I have in my top 10, I'm gonna have to go with Amanda Nunes. She proved why she's the greatest, not just female fighter of all time, but why she's in a top 10 greatest fighter of all time list. She has the double champ status. Granted, featherweight in the women's division is not very deep, But, she still has it, and it's definitely worth noting. She beat Cyborg for that belt. So Cyborg, probably the second best female fighter of all time, if we're talking like strictly women. I think she solidified her spot there. She had that hiccup against Juliana Pena and then won the belt back, showed that, she's not on the downturn of her career. Like, she didn't let the fame and success get to her. She's still here to dominate.
Definitely.
So now we're going to top 5. This is probably where a lot of the fans like to get controversial on who's at what number and which not. But I'm going to have to go number 5, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Excellent lightweight, 29-0, retired. I think his resume is not that deep, and that's why I'm putting him at 5 and not higher up. Some people would consider him number 1. I think that's way too far up. But, while he was around and while he was in the UFC, there was no one that really challenged him. Conor McGregor, probably put up the most fight out of all his defenses.
One round, against him.
Dustin Poirier, Gaethje, they all failed. I think Khabib, he solidified his spot in the sport. He's definitely one of the GOATs. And, now he's coaching, so it's great to see him still around.
Yeah.
Moving on to number 4. This kind of goes back to what I was saying about BJ Penn, in that a lot of these fighters, you can't look at how their career ended. My number 4, I'm going to go with Anderson the Spider Silva. In his prime, nobody could touch him at middleweight. He ran laps through that division. He moved up to light heavyweight for a fight, to fight Forrest Griffin and beat him easily. I think he knocked him out with a jab, if I remember correctly. You can make the case that he's number 1, but again, with how his career ended, it wasn't the best downturn. And then just looking ahead of the list, it's really tough to place him above these next top 3. But moving over to number 3, I'm gonna have to go with Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson.
Good pick.
Very underrated fighter in the fact that a lot of casuals don't know him at all. He was one of the most dominating champions in the UFC. Just the fact that he was at flyweight for most of his career, people don't really pay that much attention to it. But he had 11 title defenses, if I remember correctly. Completely dominated the flyweight division to the point that the UFC was considering getting rid of the division, because up until that point there was really no one else to make the division exciting. Then Cejudo went down, and now we have Moreno and Figueiredo, 4 coming up next month. But I think that division, you're always going to think of Mighty Mouse. Now he's doing his thing at 1. He's a champion over there. Excellent fighter. He's my number 3. Number 2, I think a lot of people would put him at number 1. Me, respectfully, I'm going to have to place him at 2, and that's Georges St-Pierre. When you think of mixed martial artists, the definition of what that is, it's GSP. It's Georges St-Pierre. He excelled at every aspect of mixed martial arts. Had phenomenal wrestling, and he didn't have a wrestling background. He grew up in Montreal or Quebec, one of those countries or provinces in Canada, and he just showed why he was the best welterweight, and still is, in my opinion, the best welterweight of all time. His only 2 losses, he avenged those losses against Matt Hughes and Matt Serra. He retired, came back 5 years later at middleweight. Mind you, the middleweight champion at the time was a very winnable fight for him in Michael Bisping. But he won the fight, and he won the middleweight belt and then vacated it, and he's been retired ever since. But he's definitely cementing that number 2 spot on my list. And then moving to number 1, I got to go with Bones Jones.
You got to do it.
John Jones. I think it's very easy to discredit him just given his out-of-the-octagon antics, whether it's failed drug tests or, drug tests, either steroids or cocaine or, incidents with the police, run-ins with the law. It's very tough. It's very hard to defend him. I'm not defending his actions or any of that. I'm strictly speaking on him as a fighter, him as a UFC champion. He's the greatest of all time, no doubt about it. His resume, when you look it over, it's insane how many title defenses and the competition that he was fighting. And then, mind you, he's the youngest UFC champion ever, winning the light heavyweight belt at 23 years old. And for those of you that aren't aware, the UFC light heavyweight division was the bread and butter of the whole entire company for many years. John Jones ultimately was the one that kind of put a halt to it, and showed everyone that all the contenders, you know, they can fight for that 1 through 10 spot. The champion's always going to be John Jones when he's in the picture. Now, he vacated the belt 3 years ago, and we've had, I think, 4 or 5 title changes since. You know, it's insane.
It's always been a stacked division, and I think you hit, like, every possible factor that we can on John Jones. One of the things about him is always the criticism with the drugs and his personal life. And, you know, when we're doing these top 10 lists, you got to understand, you know, it's as a fighter, you know, you're ranking an athlete at the end of the day. I can't judge you by everything you do outside. Can I think you're a scumbag? Can I think you're a terrible human? Absolutely. But, you know, that's definitely not what we're doing here. And we're going to try to keep personal biases away from here, you know. So this is our top 10 as far as who you were in the octagon, who you were in your career, what you did for the UFC. Less of that, because then, you know, McGregor would just fly through here. Right. But your career, right? And as a champion and your dominance. So I'm going to start with my top 10.
Yep.
Yours was very good. I think we mix them a lot. I think that one goes off personal preference. My number 10 is Alexander Volkanovski. And people may say it's a little early, but here's my thing about Volkanovski. I think he's such a sleeper. I think he came out of nowhere almost in his career, kind of like from behind. People really didn't know he was there. And then he just rises to superstardom, and now he's such a dominant champion. He's number 1 pound for pound. It's well earned. He's as technical as it gets. There's not a factor in his game that's lacking. He could do it on the ground. He could do it standing. He could fight for 25 minutes. He's truly a GOAT. And I think as time goes on, hopefully he gets this win against Islam. I really do see him climbing up the ranks. If he could get this double champ status, I'll move him up even more. And that's for Alexander Volkanovski as my 10. Number 9, I had to go with the second best welterweight of all time, Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman was so close, right? If he beats Leon Edwards, gets another matchup against, let's say now Khamzat's coming up, beats Khamzat, does something like that, I have him up there with GSP. He's been dominant for a few years. My problem with him is that he doesn't have enough names on his resume. You know, we have a couple repeats of fights. We have Kobe, Masvidal. So, you know, even though he has defended his belt quite a few times, I think he needs still, because he's not done. I think he's going to retake that belt. We'll talk about it later. Chances are may retire on top. We'll see. But Kamaru Usman was definitely, in my eyes, is definitely the second best welterweight of all time. So he's my number 9. Number 8, we actually have the same number 8. I'm going DC. Double champ, comes in, Olympic wrestler, and he just shows you that when one aspect of your game is so dominant, you will be dominant. And, you know, he's one of the people who put wrestling on the map. In the UFC as well as Triple C, as well as Khabib, you know, a few other guys, even though Khabib technically, you know, he has his own, that whole Dagestani ensemble, but, you know, that grappling is such a big factor of the game, and I give DC my number 8 spot. Number 7, which I was very surprised not to see on your list, I'm going Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo went on one of the best streaks ever, starting from WEC, going into the UFC, and he remained so dominant for, was it a decade, really?
Yep, pretty much.
And then obviously we know that Conor McGregor, that 13-second knockout. Yeah. And it is what it is. It was a bad night for him. He, you know, opened up too much. McGregor got the best of him. It kind of changed up his career. But I think what also solidifies Jose Aldo as one of the GOATs is his run in the last couple of years. Even though now we know he retired, he made a second run at the championship at bantamweight, and I think that's relevant to speak upon. So that's why he's my number 7. Number 6, and he doesn't hit my top 5 because I do have a few problems with him. Number 6 is Khabib Nurmagomedov, and you hit every point I could possibly make. 29-0. Dominant. There was no one who was even near him. I always say this about Mayweather: when you have a professional athlete that makes other professionals look like amateurs, you know you're dealing with a very, very elite athlete, an individual that you'll see once in a lifetime. A few of the guys I'm going to mention after him have the same capability to do, and they make professionals look like amateurs, and I think it's relevant to say. So Khabib Nurmagomedov left a little too early, and that's why I have him at number 6. There's no doubt in my mind that if he would have stuck around for 2 or 3 more years, gotten a few more names, let's say Michael Chandler, Charles Oliveira, a few guys under his belt, I think it would have solidified him in possibly the top 3. Okay, but I leave him at 6 and I move on from there. My number 5, believe it or not, Amanda Nunes. I think when we're talking Amanda Nunes, we have to respect the fact that not only was she a double champ, which doesn't mean much to me in certain aspects, because some people have gotten better opportunities than others. Some of them were handed. But Amanda Nunes is as dominant as it gets. Who has competed with Amanda Nunes? There's one person, it was Juliana Pena. And after Juliana Pena beat her, what did Amanda Nunes do? She got a rematch against her, and she outclassed her for 5 rounds. 3 standing up and 2 on the ground. And she said, hey, that fight solidified that she was the better fighter. There's no question. She went in there. It wasn't a bad day for Juliana Pena. She just said, I'm better than you, and this is why. And she put on a show for 5 rounds, and she ended that. So, number 4, I'm going Mighty Mouse. So you said quite a few definite things that casuals don't really know about DJ. Maybe now a little more. The problem with DJ is that he wasn't marketable. But you have to understand, I think that's another one that's on the top for pound fighters. So good. Volkanovski and him have some things in common in the sense that when I see them fight, I'm looking at a mixed martial artist. You know, there's nothing you could do to him standing. There's nothing you could do to him on the ground. There's no way to go for his weak points because there's none. He's so well-rounded. And when you have a fighter like that, that's when I think we have a true mixed martial artist and someone who's so elite. So, you know, he's done what his career was fantastic in the UFC. Now we know he's in the one. He becomes champion there. I mean, Demetrius Johnson. Honestly, I don't know why I don't even have him higher than what he is right now. And I think maybe it's true.
Might need to make a switch now.
Yeah, it's like I almost need to now speaking upon it. My number 3, I have to do with the Spider, Anderson Silva. His style, his championship defense streak, he was just so different when he came into the sport. And he was, you know, in that era where we were going from like brawling to like, okay, now we have some. There was always killers in the UFC, but it went from, you know, let's punch it out in the cage, let's go crazy in the cage. Anderson Silva came in and said, hey, this is skill based. And he just proved that he was so good all the time. He ran laps around people. He made professionals look like amateurs, and I think that's why I have Anderson Silva up there, my number 3. Number 2 and number 1, it goes without saying, you know, we match up. GSP. I was actually watching an interview of his today, and one of the points that I think makes him so special is that he not only focuses on everything inside the octagon, but he focuses so much on the things outside the octagon. He talks about psychology. He talks about overwhelming his opponent's nervous system. Like, what fighters are worried about that? He's talking about certain flinches that mean absolutely nothing, but it's going to overwhelm your fighter's sympathetic nervous system, and he's going to be, you know, and it tires him out. And it's just this whole mental aspect of the game. Besides that, obviously, the best welterweight of all time, has the resume, and I think what leaves him at number 2 is the fact that the 2 times he did lose, he avenged those losses. And not only did he avenge those losses, but he would go and fight guys, and he would beat them at their own game. And I think that's why GSP is one of the best fighters of all time, if not the best, depending on who we're asking. Number 1, and we'll do this again, it's John Bones Jones. I'm not going to go too far into it. I mean, yes, the whole personal thing I just mentioned, but let's be honest, the best resume in mixed martial arts has ever been. The most technical fighter. He will break you apart in every which way. He's in probably the most competitive division there's ever been, now a little less than back then. He fought guys from the old era. He fought guys like Shogun Rua, Lyoto Machida. He fought Rashad Evans. And
Rampage
then you come
Jackson.
you know, you come into this new era, and he's still taking guys out with debatably that win against Dominic Cruz, but he also took out DC. He took out another goal. You know what I mean? So I think it goes without saying that John Jones is just a different type of killer. He's a different breed. I hope if he comes back as a heavyweight, I hope we see the same John. I hope his career doesn't go, you know, like he doesn't tarnish anything.
Right.
And let's be honest, that no contest, he's never lost. He's never lost in my eyes.
I was just gonna say that he is undefeated. His
undefeated.
only loss on his record is that disqualification against Mark Hamill. That if I saw a TikTok the other day that it showed the entire fight, and they captioned it John Jones' only loss, and they sped up the entire fight. He's just dominating the entire.
No, he was gonna kill that man. He was gonna kill that man. So that disqualification sucks. But let's be honest, and anyone who really watches the UFC and mixed martial arts, you know that John Jones is an undefeated fighter, and that goes without saying.
And everyone unanimously pretty much agrees. You know,
whether
you hate him or love him, everyone you know is not oblivious to the fact that he is undefeated. He hasn't been beaten.
Yeah, he
only defeats himself outside of the octagon.
Yeah, but now I think it's only appropriate we move on to the 5 most exciting fighters. Yeah. And take us away, Danny.
All right, so we're gonna do a top 5 on this one, and my number 5, and maybe it's some recency bias, I don't know, but I had to go with Charles Oliveira. I think his run at the lightweight championship was great. I think he defended it more than I expected than he will.
Yeah.
I thought he was a one and done fighter. I thought, he got lucky against Chandler, and then I thought Poirier was going to come in and win the belt from him, but it wasn't his
definitely
night.
excited, but there's definitely a bias there. And I guess for this we'll go 1-1. I'm going old school here. I'm going Chuck Liddell, the Iceman. Back then, I don't know how many of the live people we have here. If you love Chuck Liddell, let me hear it. But he would go in and it was gonna be a dogfight every time. And Chuck Liddell was looking for a finish. Back then, those guys were going in there. I want to finish it. And I think that's why Chuck Liddell is one of my most exciting fighters.
And I mean, before McGregor and before John Jones, the face of the UFC was really Chuck Liddell.
I'd say so. Randy Couture and Randy. Yeah, there's a few, but definitely Chuck Liddell.
That first UFC video game, they had, I think, Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz. I used to always play with Chuck Liddell.
Yeah.
He was great.
Yeah.
The Iceman.
So now you're number 4?
So number 4, I got to go with Derek Lewis.
Fair enough. That's
every time he's fighting, I got to tune in, And it seems like everyone, just writes him off. They think he gets lucky with, one punch and that's it. But I mean, look at his resume and his
skill set's there. Definitely the heavyweight's a huge aspect. That power they pack in their punch. But he's a killer.
Yeah, he's exciting to watch. I think he brings in a lot of the casual fan base and then all the hardcore fans as well. So
I think a lot of people are not gonna like this one, but my number 4 is actually Conor McGregor. And a lot of people are like, oh, you're a hater. No, I love Conor McGregor. I used to love watching him. I'm just not oblivious and I'm not blind to what his career actually been. There's a lot of hand-me-downs and not hand-me-downs. It's not the right word to use, but a lot of handouts for him. He was bringing in crazy money, but let's be honest, I love watching the guy fight. Yeah. His striking is elite. One of the best strikers to ever step into the UFC. He's gonna absolutely crush a promo. And every time Conor McGregor walks into the octagon, you're glued to the TV. So I give him that. For me, he's my number 4.
Well, I'm glad he made it to your top 5 at least. Number 3, I'm gonna have to go with Jorge Masvidal. There might be some bias in this as well. As a fan based out of South Florida here in Miami, when I first saw Masvidal fight, I was thinking, who's this kid from Miami? He's a striker. He's really good. I come to find out he came up, boxing in backyard fights with Kimbo Slice and all that. He definitely made for some really exciting fights. I think his run in 2019 was amazing. He knocked out Till, who was just coming off of the welterweight fight against Tyron Woodley. So, he was, I think, ranked number 2 or 3. He was up there. He knocked him out. He knocked out Ben Askren, who everyone thought was going to dominate him.
Come in and wrestle his life away.
Maybe it was lightning in a bottle, maybe not, but 5-second knockout, quickest knockout in the UFC history. Amazing. And then, ending the year with a BMF fight against Nate Diaz. It was a good fight up until it ended. But every time to this point, that he's fighting, I still tune in.
Yeah.
Has had a rough go the last couple fights, but I'll still put him in there.
Yeah, I love Masvidal, and let's be honest, a part of it is that we're from Miami, so we love that aspect of his. Yep. Number 2 is that 2019 run. He was just electrifying. And number 3, he's a brawler. Yep. His striking is impeccable. So I understand that. My number 3, it was so hard to put him at number 3. Honestly, he could have been my number 2 or number 1. These last 3 are really hard. I'm putting Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler is so exciting, and I say it's honestly his his strength and his weakness, right? Because he's going in there to entertain the fans and he's looking for his knockouts. I am, just in that fight, there's no tomorrow. I can't look away. But that's actually his problem. When you see that fight against Justin Gaethje, what lost him that fight was that. So, but regardless of that, one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC ever. I'm gonna put him at ever. So
really in MMA, because in Bellator he was just as exciting as well. And his prime in Bellator, I wish we would have seen that prime Michael Chandler in the UFC, because it would have been really interesting to see how he would have matched up against the champions at the time, like RDA and Eddie Alvarez and all those guys. Yeah. So my top 2, you've already mentioned them. I think I just hold them in higher regard. Number 2, I'm going to have to say Conor McGregor. Everything you said about him is absolutely correct. I do want to highlight, though, that, when he was on that 2015, 2016 run, the guy was unstoppable, really. It wasn't until he had that, last-minute fight with Nate Diaz at welterweight, super short notice, that, someone showed that he's, beatable. And, then we get probably one of the greatest UFC rivalries of all time with that first fight and the second fight. And then McGregor comes back and gets the double champ status against Eddie Alvarez, who, it was definitely a handout, like you described. Because,
and
there were plenty of people that were lined up to, fight for the lightweight championship, but they made sure that it was Eddie Alvarez that fought McGregor because they knew that skill-wise that was his best matchup.
Absolutely. And we could go into that, but whatever.
Yeah.
So my number 2, I'm actually going with a man who's come out of nowhere in the last couple of years and is just electrifying the second he walks in. He's also a lovable guy. He's not a try-hard. He's not like trying to be this alpha or something.
He's himself, for sure.
He's himself. Yeah. And it's Tai Tuivasa. One aspect is that he's a heavyweight. The other aspect is that he's so likable. He's going to come in. He's going to knock this guy out. Go drink a beer out of a shoe. He's coming out to like girls just want to have fun. So he's a good time. He's exciting. Every time he fights, I'm pumped to watch. Even this last fight with Cyril Gane, just him being able to take such a beating. Him as a juggernaut. He's a juggernaut. So just him, I know he's going to get the beat out of him. And I know he's going to beat the shit out of whoever he's fighting. So every time I'm just tuned in. And I think Tai Tuivasa is definitely worth mentioning.
His last 2 fights, he's definitely had a tough go-around, but it's against the elite of the division. Cyril Gane and Sergey Pavlovich.
Those were tough.
But he's a fan favorite, absolutely. I think he's probably the fan favorite right now if you looked at the active roster.
He's super exciting.
But really good pick. My number 1, you already mentioned him. And, what we could talk about it more, but Michael Chandler, I think... every time he's fighting, everyone's tuning in. His last 2 fights have been great. His last 3 fights were, they didn't really go the way that he wanted it, but the fans didn't lose any interest in him. So his last fight, losing against Poirier, he almost had that fight. If it went a whole 3rd round, probably would have gotten a decision. Before that, he front kicks Tony Ferguson to oblivion. He won the fans back with that.
Yeah.
And then before that, he had that classic with Gaethje.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people wrote him off. I think they didn't think he had a chance, and he showed that he could hang with him and then still hang with him while fighting recklessly.
Yeah.
Had he implemented, a little bit more fight IQ, against Poirier and Gaethje, he probably would have won those fights. But that's not Michael Chandler, at least at this stage. He talks about it all the time, that he's not here for a long time, he's here for a good time.
Yeah, he wants to sell fights, and he does. You know what? The man sells pay-per-views, and if we're being frank, I think him and Conor McGregor are going to end up fighting because so many people want to tune into that. I do. And I have to say my number 1, it's kind of crazy to put him here already because we're talking about most exciting fighters, and we're giving our personal list here. So, Sean O'Malley, man, it's so crazy. When I watch this kid, I'm mesmerized, man. Yeah. I really do think he is like an artist in his craft. His striking is honestly impeccable. He has a flow you can't match this guy. And everything's so fluid and I don't know, I just really enjoy watching him. I'm excited when he's out there. I know he's going for a knockout. He's going to walk off knockout. He's going to throw a kick out of nowhere. He has great hands. I mean, his striking is fun to watch to me. It's artistic. It literally looks like he's almost dancing out there, and it's like something I'm not used to seeing almost. I feel like, and then he's just a personality, and I spoke about Tai Tuivasa, but so is Sean O'Malley. He has this thing going on for him, and I don't know, I really like him, and I like the fact that he's knocking people out at 135 pounds, which you don't see too often, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah, that's my number 1, which I know is going to be very debatable. Very debatable.
I do want to note that, these are top 5 most exciting, but, most of these fighters are elite in their divisions.
All these guys.
O'Malley proved it last fight against Jan,
which
he won, but, a lot of people disagree with the decision.
Definitely.
But he showed that he can hang with the best of the best in that division.
I think those lists are pretty good. And so, anyway, just because I want to break it down, I want to be able to clip these. I want you to just say your top 5 most exciting fighters from 5 to 1 without an explanation. Just jet them down. This is a clip for TikTok. So there you go. Top 5 most exciting fighters.
Charles Oliveira, 5. 4, Derek Lewis. 3, Jorge Masvidal. 2, Conor McGregor. And 1, Iron Michael Chandler.
All right, so my top 5 most exciting fighters written down. Number 5, Chuck Liddell. Number 4, Conor McGregor. Number 3, Michael Chandler. Number 2, Tai Tuivasa. And number 1, believe it or not, The Sugar Show, Sean O'Malley. And let me know if you agree, guys. Let me know who's your most exciting fighter. We're here on live on TikTok, by the way. Double tap that screen, and we're moving on to our top 5 personal favorites. And actually, we're going to do it backwards. So what I want you to do this time, we're going to do the same thing, but first let's mention them 5, and then we'll break them down. All right, so do your 5, then break them down.
All right. you're going to see a lot of the same names that we've already discussed.
But this is a little different, and this is what I want to explain here too, guys. We spoke about our top 10 GOATs. That goes into career, that goes into what we see in the fighter, their abilities, capabilities,
taking out the bias in it,
trying our best to take out the bias.
Right.
Definitely. Then we went to the most exciting, like who we want to watch. Could be to watch them get knocked out. It could be just because they're in it and they're brawlers. And now we're just doing personal favorites. So this goes inside, outside the octagon. It's a little different. So Danny, let's hear your top 5 personal favorites.
All right. So at 5, we're picking up where we left off. Michael Chandler. 4, I'm gonna have to go with Dan Henderson. 3, John Jones. 2, GSP, and then number 1, Dustin the Diamond Poirier.
So this is my assumption. Michael Chandler, class act, obviously good guy, great. He's a brawler. I understand that. John Jones, number 3 there. GSP, number 2. I understand those. But tell us a little bit of why Dan Henderson is on your top 5 list,
right,
and Dustin Poirier. I'm really curious. And Dustin Poirier is number 1, which I feel like he's a likable guy, but to have at number 1 is something.
All right, so I'll start off with Hendo. As I've gotten more into MMA, I started rewatching fights from back in the day, specifically from Pride FC, which at the time, that mid-2000s era, early 2000s to mid-2000s, it was arguably better than the UFC.
Yeah,
with the talent that they had and the fights they were putting on. Yeah. It was over there in Japan. The UFC ended up buying it or something years later when it went bankrupt, but that's why you see a lot of these ex-UFC fighters, they were originally in Pride. Henderson is technically the original double champ because he won the Pride 185 belt and the 205 belt. So, just by doing that, he was first and not McGregor. But, for the UFC marketing and all that, they consider McGregor the first double champ in UFC history. Technically, it's true, but Dan Henderson was that in Pride. I think he had that right hand that, I still watch the highlights to this day, that it was just insane. That H-bomb, as they called it. He has some really classic fights, which we'll get into later. I think he's, a lot of people forget about him, but, when he was there in his prime, he was a force to be reckoned with. He was definitely a brute. More on Dustin Poirier, why he's making my number 1. Again, maybe some South Florida bias coming in. He trains down here at American Top Team. But I've been a fan ever since I listened to a podcast of him on this past weekend with Theo Vaughn. They're friends, from Louisiana and stuff. I think he's just a really likable guy. He's a chill dude.
He's very relatable.
Yeah.
He gives you that, like, I'm just a man, I'm trying to make it, work for my family, have a family, care for my family, and that's it.
Yeah, like all he cares about these days is his family, selling hot sauce, and fighting. And he showed that, even though, his 2 title fights didn't go his way, this last fight against Poirier, or against Chandler, he showed that, he can still compete at the top of that division, and maybe he'll make another run for the belt.
Man, he can. He's so good.
And if he ends up not winning the belt, I think he's going to be the greatest fighter to never have won a belt.
Yeah.
I think he technically won the interim belt.
But, we don't count that. And I agree with you. I think, right, as of now, I think he's already the best to never win a belt.
Yeah. And then, just, again, looking at his record, similar to John Jones, he has the best of the best in featherweight and lightweight.
He's definitely taken down the best.
He, in his prime, and I think he's still in his prime, I think he was one of the best lightweights to ever walk the earth.
I agree with you there. So, I love that list. Let me give you my top 5 personal favorite UFC fighters. So, at number 5, I actually have Sean O'Malley. I've just become such a fan. So, let me break it down. Sean O'Malley, then Alexander Volkanovski, GSP, John Jones, and number 1, Chuck Liddell. So, I think mine... I feel like mine is a more casual list, to be honest with you. Sean O'Malley, in today's day and age, so exciting. This guy who fights with styles, getting knockouts. He's fun to watch. The colored hair. Alexander Volkanovski, that's the sleeper, I think, if anything. I love Alexander Volkanovski because I just think he's so humble. He has, like, when you see him, he doesn't have, like, Napoleon syndrome. He's like this. He is, like, an alpha male, and he's, like, just doing his own thing. He has his cooking show. He's so cool, funny. Like, he is a good vibe, and I just love him for that.
Agreed.
And then as a fighter, he's, like... just top notch. You know what I mean? It's just like a 10 out of 10. GSP, I have to do it just because of his career. I also think he's so great. And back to what I said when I was speaking about the GOATs, I love how he takes the psychology of fighting and uses it. I love how he is as a champion. I love, like, he was like that kid who got bullied growing up. He wasn't, and he comes back and he just becomes this animal in the UFC. John Jones, God, honestly, I'm not gonna go into him as a person because I think then I wouldn't have him on this list. It has less to do with that, even though I think some of his interests are cool. But just the best fighter of all time. I think he's a killer. He's like, and he has that like mean, just like I'm that guy. I'm that guy mentality. He's not a softie. I think that's why. And then Chuck Liddell, it's 110% because he's a brawler. He's my first ever favorite fighter when I started watching UFC and actually playing the UFC game back in when the Xbox 360 had, I think it was in 2009. When I started playing that game, it was always Chuck Liddell. Watching Chuck Liddell fights, going back in time watching Chuck Liddell fights. Also very humble, believe it or not. He looks like this crazy guy, the mohawk, and this super nice guy. When you hear him in the interviews, just a cool guy, and that's why he's my number one.
Yeah, it's a solid list.
I think so too.
I think something that I want to point out as well. This is the MMA Casual podcast. When you think of MMA Casual, you always think of like, oh, McGregor's the best, fighter of all time.
Yeah.
I think now in this current generation, that's going to be who Sean O'Malley is for all these kids that are coming up and getting into the UFC and MMA.
Yeah.
Because he's so big on YouTube. He Twitch streams. He's always hanging out with the Nelk boys and whatnot. I think, a couple years down the road, you're going to hear a lot of people saying O'Malley's the best fighter of all time. Granted, he has to win the belt, which we'll probably, get into a little
we might see
later,
this year, yeah.
I think it's a solid list.
Yeah,
so.
I agree with you. I think it's so easy to say McGregor fans are casuals. With that being said, I always say the majority. Obviously not everyone, because if you were following, McGregor when even before the UFC, why are you a casual? I mean, you saw his rising. But half the people probably weren't even into McGregor when he fought Dennis Siver. And let's be frank, you know what I mean? And then he comes in and then he starts his trash talking against like Chad and Aldo, and then works his way up to Nate. And that's when a lot of guys really came in to watch him. And you are a casual if that was like your man. I hate to tell you. And a lot of people say John Jones is a casual answer too. I think when we look at track record, no. But I think Sean O'Malley's going to be the new McGregor. And I think Paddy Pimblett too. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be as successful as any of them in the fight game. But if he keeps getting some wins and let's say he improves and let's say they have that superstardom, we're going to get a lot of casuals for Paddy too.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see,
Okay, it's too early.
Yeah, his skills have to back up,
Which it doesn't right now. It doesn't. They're not, So what do we got next?
So now we have top 5 favorite fights of all time.
Awesome.
This list was actually pretty hard to come up with.
So hard. This is harder. I think this is a harder list to come up with than the GOAT list.
Oh, for sure. Because the GOAT list, 1 through 5, you could really put them in any order.
You could put them in any order and it's respectable. And not only that, but like you got stats, right?
Yeah.
Like I know who has the most career defenses. I know who had the longest fight streak. I know, so you could use that to help you out. But here, like, what are we judging on? And I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to kind of elaborate. So I want, same thing, let's run through them, just say what they are, and then we'll break it down. And then I kind of want you, when you're going to break it down, give us your criteria of why, like what you're looking for. What's a top 5 fight to you?
All right, so right away, top 5 fight, what like factored into this decision was how memorable it was.
Okay.
What I felt watching it for the first time live as it was happening.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely bias there.
Yeah, there's going to be bias.
It's a personal list. 3, the outcome of the fight, the stakes, was it a championship fight? Was it, how was the pressure? And then I guess 4, just, how big of a fight was it? Do a lot of people, agree? Is it, a completely random fight that, not many people, would say that it's up there? That's what I factored into my decision, and so I guess. So
let's get Danny's top 5 UFC fights of all time. List them.
Yeah, number 5, Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler just took place. Number 4, John Jones versus DC 2. Number 3, Paulo Costa, Yoel Romero. Number 2, Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva 1, and number 1, Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 1.
I can't wait to put that on TikTok.
Yeah.
I might put that tonight because I can't wait for everybody to just come at you with some crazy comments. But let's hear it. Defend yourself at least.
All right. So Chandler Poirier, recency bias, sure. Big Poirier fan here. I think watching that fight, Poirier was in danger. Chandler was definitely showing a lot more fight IQ than he normally does. But Poirier showed, his vet experience, and he showed why he's one of the best flyweights on the earth. Probably, still top 3, top 5. John Jones, DC2. I think The first fight was excellent. I think a lot of people didn't know how it was going to pan out. They wanted to see, DC's wrestling, Olympic level wrestling versus John Jones, who was a great wrestler, and John Jones took him down. The first fight ended in a decision. There was still bad blood afterwards. In that second fight, they wanted to make it for UFC 200. John Jones failed a drug test. It didn't take place till I think UFC 214. And leading up to that build-up, it was the same as the first fight. No love lost between the two. Plenty of trash talk. John Jones telling him that he beat him after a weekend of cocaine.
Yeah.
Very memorable line.
Yeah.
And then John goes in there and knocks out DC. And I remember watching that live and thinking, wow, this guy is just levels ahead of the best in that division. Because DC would beat anyone in that division.
Yeah.
At that point.
Absolutely.
And John Jones just made it look easy, honestly. Costa Romero, I think...
that one's a little biased, I feel.
Yeah, for sure.
That one has a little bias in it.
Because I think, so just a personal note, before I got into MMA and all that, I was very big into bodybuilding, powerlifting. So just being strong, I'm already, enticed to watch the middleweights fight because they're brutes, physically. The division is just very physically demanding, I would say. Each division is, but more so in middleweight. And just watching these two gladiators, modern day gladiators, go at it.
They really are. Especially
it was
Romero.
insane, And at that point, Paulo Costa, young undefeated fighter coming up, going against Romero, who was just coming off of those losses against Whitaker, So it was his biggest test. And Romero got Costa got the decision. Some people thought Romero won the fight. Romero ends up getting the title shot against Adesanya off of that fight, off of a loss. But I remember watching that live and thinking, wow, this is an instant classic. Like, these two Chad of men just going at it, nonstop. That one was really fun. Moving on to number 2. This one, I think I would have put it at number 1, but, I had to take the slight edge to my number 1 pick. But number 2, I'm going to go Chael Sonnen versus Silva, the first fight.
It's a good fight.
That was going to be Chael's win with another minute to go. And then Anderson Silva rallies back after getting beaten and broken for 24 minutes. He rallies back and submits Chael Sonnen.
Yeah.
Chael tapped. He made it look like he didn't tap, but he tapped. And up until that point, no one had made it look as easy as Chael did to take down Anderson Silva and completely dominate him. He was winning that entire fight.
He won that fight if he does not tap.
He won 24 of those 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And, had it gone a minute extra, Chael Sonnen would have been the middleweight champion, but unfortunately it didn't. Still, I like to rewatch that fight just because of the stakes that were at play and the factors going into it. Chael was the first in that division to almost give Silva his first loss.
Yeah.
As he was champion. And my number 1, I'm going to have to go with Kamaru Usman versus Covington 1. And the reason is that I remember watching that fight for the first time. All the trash talk leading up to it, all of the, you couldn't tell if they really hated each other, if it was just, building it up for the fight. In the end, we saw that it was genuine hate. They actually don't like each other. I just remember watching that fight and thinking, wow, Colby Covington is about to, make this look easy. And then Kamaru comes back and, TKO's Colby. It was so back and forth that I couldn't tell you, who won round 1, 2, 3, 4 off the top of my head. That's fights. Something that I have to revisit each time I watch that fight and then, score it again. But that was a fight that watching it live, I'll never forget that feeling and just thinking, wow, this is my favorite fight of all time. The rematch was amazing.
Yeah. Both those fights were great. Those guys were made to fight each other. And let me tell you, your list, I think 2 of those fights are definitely just because of the experience you had watching them. Yeah. But I love your number 1. I wouldn't put it anywhere near my list, so that's why I can't wait to put this on TikTok. So let's talk my top 5 UFC fights of all time, which I've actually made a video about. But here we go. Number 5, I have Chandler Gaethje. Instant classic in my opinion. I think it's the best recent fight we've had. Diego Sanchez versus Clay Guida. Stephen Bonner against Forrest Griffin. Then Lawler McDonald 2. And number 1, I have Henderson versus Shogun Rule. And my list, I feel like a little more retro. It has a little more respect.
I was just going to say, I feel like a lot of those clips that you get for the TikTok, I think that's where that experience is coming in, that you're reminded of all these classics.
I also think that the fact that I'm always looking at UFC replays and looking at clips and highlights, it kind of brings me back. And let's be honest, there's less personal bias here because I saw two of those lives. Which was Lawler McDonald 2 and Chandler Gaethje. The other three I didn't even watch live. It was literally replays, which I think anybody could attest to it. And when you rewatch a UFC fight, it's so different than watching it live. When you're watching one of these fights live, especially a championship fight, something that's, just a lot on the line, guys who don't like each other, it's crazy. Obviously, the excitement's there. So that tells you a lot. Chandler Gaethje, it goes without saying, two warriors, and I think I need to make clear my criteria, which is a little different from yours. I'd like to say I like to see every aspect of MMA in a fight, but that's not the truth here at all. In a couple of these fights, you see a little bit of everything, but personally, and I guess you could call me a casual for this, I think it's one of the most casual things I could say, is that I love when these guys are brawling. I love a fight that is standing the whole time. And I know that's a super casual take, and I know people are going to be like, oh, this guy knows nothing. But that doesn't mean I don't appreciate everything in mixed martial arts. If anything, I do love a fight that goes to the ground. I love watching good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I like watching people fight in the clinch. I like watching a guy who could take you down. I like watching every aspect. However, what gets me the most excited, the things I like the most, is definitely striking, and I feel like it's a large majority of people who feel the same. Yep. So with that being said, I think one of the other aspects that I love about a good fight is when you don't know who's winning. I like it when these guys are beating the hell out of each other, and from 1 second to another, we have a whole change in fight. So I've been dominating you for one round, I knocked you down twice, you got up, all of a sudden round 2, Danny's winning a 10-8 round. And it's like, who is winning this fight? I can't tell, and it goes to show, like what you were saying about Usman Covington, there was so much striking in that match.
They two wrestlers.
Yes, they were because they respect each other on the ground. So it caused a striking battle, and they were just exchanging, and you didn't know who had the edge. And I think that says a lot about my list. Chandler Gaethje, that Clay Guida, anytime he walks into the octagon, very exciting guy, very fun to watch. He's going out there. Diego Sanchez, heart of a lion. Bonner Griffin, debatably what saved the UFC. That's always the Ultimate Fighter talk. Right. And when they first shot the Ultimate Fighter, it's what's actually saved the UFC. Lawler McDonald, I think that's my biased pick because I saw it live and I remember it being like, what the heck is going on? I remember seeing Lawler's face, and then Rory McDonald as well. He looked like a freaking balloon. Yeah. And it was just a really close fight. Went 5 rounds until finally Robbie Lawler gets a nice straight in, and then Rory McDonald kind of backs up and just falls down. He had fractured one of his bones. And then Dan Henderson, Shogun Rule. I saw that fight. I rewatched that fight probably within the last year, and it had to do with a replay I was putting. And oh my God, that fight has everything. Yeah. That fight is two gladiators who not only do you see them beat the hell out of each other, they're grappling. And last but not least, you see so much heart. The last 2 rounds, those guys are so exhausted that I'm surprised if they have their hands up for more than 30 seconds at a time. Yeah. They are just swinging at each other. Dan Henderson is barely breathing at the end. Shogun Rule, and there's so much blood, sweat. It's just that. If you want to show someone a UFC fight and say, hey, you think this is not a man's sport. Right. You think this is like I don't know who would say that, but you want to prove to them that UFC is real deal. You want to prove that MMA is barbaric. Show them Dan Henderson against Shogun Rule. Yeah. And that's how I feel about that. So I'm very curious to post our list, and I'll put them hand in hand just a list. And I can't wait to see what the TikTok viewers say because I think we're gonna have 2 very, very different
it is what it is,
takes.
Man,
And just for the people we have here on live, we have a couple more things to touch upon, and then we're gonna answer a few questions. So stick around and don't forget to double tap that screen and be sure to share. All right. So now for basically we're closing out with 2023 predictions, and I actually thought of this today. I didn't think about it. I guess I'm stealing it because I saw, I don't know if it was MMA Junkie or one of the big MMA pages posted their predictions of the year, and I was like, hey, that's a really good idea. We each. So I think it's only fair if we do that with a few different names. So. All right. So.
Do you want to start it off with this one?
Yeah, let's start off. Let's start Sean O'Malley. I've mentioned Sean O'Malley a lot. Like I said, one of my favorites, but you know what, I'm not blind, especially since we're trying to get into this MMA media game, and you don't want to be biased. I want to be honest. I do think he lost that fight against Petr Yan. Watching it afterwards, I think it's a lot closer than I thought initially. But Sean O'Malley needs to fight someone else before he fights the belt. I think it's only right. Do I think it's going to happen? Not necessarily. But I would love for him to fight the winner of Marlon Vera and Cody Sandhagen.
Yeah, Corey Sandhagen.
Corey Sandhagen, sorry. And yeah, I hope he becomes champ. I don't know if it's going to happen this year. I could see him becoming champ late 2023. But I actually hope it happens. What do you think?
I think, technically speaking, that's fair. That's what they should do. But the UFC is not dumb. They're going to do what's best for the UFC.
Yeah.
My prediction is that the winner of Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo is going to fight Sean O'Malley for the belt in July, International Fight Week. And I think...
Damn, that's like specific. That's a nasty take right there. I had to post that one. That's a good take.
And I think, depending on the outcome of Sterling versus Cejudo, I don't know how Sean's chances are. I think against Sterling, he has a better chance to win. To win that belt.
We haven't seen Cejudo in a bit, though. You know, I know we give the Triple C credit, double champ, very dominant, DJ. But let's be honest, ring rust is a thing. I believe in ring rust a lot, and he gained some weight. I mean, he still has the skill sets. However, it's very easy to come back and not be the same fighter. Yeah.
So I guess my prediction with that, though, I'm still gonna lean with Cejudo. I think if Cejudo wins against Sterling, then he's gonna beat O'Malley. I think if Sterling beats Cejudo, then O'Malley has a good chance to win the belt. And MMA math there doesn't work out, but when does it ever,
Yeah, I love that take, actually.
And I think, I don't know. Of course, we're going to know, based on the fight between Cejudo and Sterling. But, 100% agree, ring rust is a thing. I just don't think it's as big of a thing at such an elite level. So that's why, like with the John Joneses and guys that are taking that long of a layoff, I think they come back and they're right back where they left off.
I don't know. History doesn't agree with you there, so we'll see. And I guess next up, let's talk Leon Edwards. I'm not the biggest Leon Edwards fan. I was disappointed that he won because I did think that Usman deserved that win. He beat the shit out of him. He dominated him.
He won the fight up until that point.
Yeah, and then he lands that kick, and I'm not gonna take anything away because it was a strategic kick. He was throwing that kick all fight to the body. Obviously, Usman got lazy, dropped his arms.
It was a real Rocky moment.
It was a real Rocky moment. It was a great fight IQ moment, and I don't want to take anything away, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I think Usman wins that rematch. Even if you throw Jorge Masvidal beats him striking, which is a crazy take, but I believe it. Colby Covington beats Leon Edwards, and not only that, but he kills him. Khamzat Chimaev kills Leon Edwards. Sure. So I hope I never get the opportunity to interview Leon Edwards because, my God, I sound like a hater, but I do believe those guys could beat him. And I think even you want to have some fun, throw Stephen Wonderboy Thompson against Leon Edwards so we could see like a fun striking match. But
right.
I'm not on the Leon Edwards train. I'm not convinced. And my prediction for 2023, Leon Edwards will no longer be the welterweight champion of the UFC.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of bounces off to my prediction. I agree that he's not going to be the welterweight champion anymore. I think Kamaru Usman's going to beat him. But I think Kamaru Usman's going to beat him and then retire from the sport. I think he's going to go out on his shield.
What a good take, man.
I think he's proven, why he's such an elite welterweight, why he's going to go down in the history books. Whether you want to put him against or above GSP, that's up to you.
No.
I personally won't. But, the level of competition and the defenses that he's had, he definitely makes a case for it to be the best welterweight of all time. I think he's going to retire because he's already gotten to that point that he's fought the who's who in that division. He's proven, that he handled this era of welterweights. Now he's coming off of a hand surgery that apparently he's still recovering from. Who knows if this fight's even going to go down in March.
That was a rumor.
And when those injuries start, stacking up, he got brutally knocked out against Leon Edwards.
That changes the fighter as well.
You don't know what he's thinking. I think, personally, he's going to go out on his shield. He's going to retire and just keep acting in movies.
Doing his thing, yeah. I love that take, honestly, because I think I really agree with you. I think we can see Kamaru Usman retire this year. One of the things I am going to say is if he comes in, beats Leon Edwards, and retires, Kamaru Usman is not in talks for the best welterweight of all time. GSP remains because of his resume. I love the fact that Usman will avenge his loss, but it's not enough. I think Usman needs to come in. He needs to beat Leon Edwards. Then he needs to beat Khamzat Chimaev. And then I think we need to throw another name at him. And then right there we have a heck of a debate. There, you know what? I'm like, all right, if you're taking out someone like Khamzat and then another name.
Yeah, I mean, if he beats Khamzat and then Shavkat beats another elite welterweight, and then Shavkat fights for the belt, and then Usman beats him.
Yeah,
and
I
he
think,
just killed all the hype in the welterweight division.
Yeah, and I think that we could then talk about the best welterweight and him in that conversation. Right now, he's an easy number 2. He's not number 1. Doesn't have enough names on his list, like we said before.
Right.
But it's he's gonna be Leon Edwards when they fight again. I have no doubt.
I agree. Yeah.
So I think we see Kamaru Usman. Our take is, I guess he becomes champ this year again. He regains the welterweight title, and I think our other take is that he potentially retires. So that's a really good take on him. And then moving on to some real excitement, Conor McGregor.
Juice to the gills. What do you think is going to be in 2023 for him? Do you think he's going to fight again in MMA? Do you think?
Yeah. So we know he's been out of the USADA pool. We know he's injecting every possible substance his team is finding for him, and he looks great. I think his performance is going to be great. I think at this point he does want to compete. He has not lost that hunger. He comes in and out of the game too much to be good. That's my opinion on Conor McGregor.
Yeah, he can't hang with the.
He can't. So I don't think he fights Dustin Poirier again. I think what they bring him in, and you never know what the UFC is gonna do, because they might do something stupid. They might be like, oh, he could fight for a title, even though I doubt it.
No.
I think we're going money fight, and I think they're gonna give him to Michael Chandler, and I think that's the best thing for both of them. Michael Chandler, he deserves a paycheck. Let him get it. Another thing is he's coming off. Even though it's 5 or 4 fights in the UFC now, he's lost 3 of them. 4 fights, he's lost 3.
5 fights, he's lost
5?
3. Yeah, he won against Hooker and Ferguson.
I forgot about the Hooker fight. That's what it was. Okay, so he he's a little inconsistent. Even though every time he performs, it's a hell of a matchup. But I think it's just right to throw in those guys, because it's going to be fireworks in that octagon. I think it's what's going to sell the most. So I think 2023, I think we see Conor McGregor against Michael Chandler in the octagon.
I agree, and I think we see it International Fight Week in July. I think
you love that one. That's what you take, International Fight Week, which I love it. That's
I think that headlines the Vegas card.
Yeah.
And then, just to throw another name in there, I do think that's the fight that they're going to make, and I think they're going to make it at 170.
Yeah, definitely. If they fight, it'd be 170 for sure.
There's no reason for either of those guys to cut for that fight. But if they don't do Chandler, I think they're probably going to throw Masvidal to him.
Wow, that's fun. That's fun. I like that.
It was a fun fight in 2019 when Masvidal was coming up, and McGregor, had that fight against Cowboy at 170. But at the time, the UFC couldn't just put their 2 biggest stars against each other, because one of them has to lose. I think now that they're both coming off these losing skids, now's the time to make that fight.
It's the time, and they're just so exciting. Those are the 2 most exciting guys we could think of, and around there. So.
Definitely, I don't see him coming back and fighting Poirier or anyone.
No, making another Poirier fight is dumb, in my opinion. And honestly, those fights weren't as exciting as I wanted them to be. Honestly, that's just my opinion. That's
right.
So next up, your boy. I'll let you start this up. What's gonna happen to Charles Oliveira, Browns, in 2023?
That one's tough because UFC 280 didn't go his way, and I think it didn't go his way in a very tough fashion.
Yeah.
He got completely handled by Islam Makhachev. I think his next fight is probably not going to be till the latter half of 2023. Mm-hmm. He's going to take off, half the year. And I think he's going to come back against an elite, maybe top 5, and if not top 5, just outside of top 5 at 6 or 7, lightweight. And, looking at the names and who he's fought and who he hasn't, I think Rafael Fiziev is a good one to throw at him.
I agree.
I think if you want to go even higher than that, him versus Dariush would be a great fight to make.
I want to give Dariush a title shot already.
Yeah, he deserves it for sure.
It's like it's messed up what the UFC's done to that man. Yeah. And by the time he gets a title shot, he's gonna be ready to retire. And it's BS at this point. So
yeah, but I think that's what Oliveira's gonna do. I don't think his next fight's gonna be a rematch for the belt. I
don't think he earned that one. He was a good champion for the time being. He's come up. He's had a great career. I think he needs to fight someone top 10, obviously. Get that win, and then let's give him the rematch after that if he wins his fight. But I think Dariush versus Islam next. I think that's only fair.
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there, which I think that's a pretty good matchup. Maybe we can see that at the end of 2020.
And so, are you saying Dariush doesn't fight anyone? He waits for the winner of Volk versus Islam now in February.
Doesn't wait for the winner. I mean, the winner. Oh yeah, because technically Volk will become champ if he wins. So yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So you don't think he needs another fight?
No, why?
Okay.
Until when? Why are you putting so much at risk constantly?
Yeah.
And at this point, just stay ready. And I mean, these guys are fighting quick. That turnover for Islam and Volk, they're fighting quick. They're fighting. Yeah. So whatever. Give them another 4 or 5 months, and bam, it's time to go.
I would agree. I just think the UFC's history, and especially Dana White's history on, fighters taking that route, he's not a big fan of it. He likes fighters to stay active.
Yeah, but
it's
he
great.
just fought. He just fought not too long ago. I don't think it's that serious if he waits for that winner.
Yeah.
When did Dariush fight? 280 or 281? 280. Yeah. So I mean, what? Early November?
That was October.
October.
Yeah.
So what?
I don't know. It's pushing it. It'll be closer to the year mark, but
it'll be close. But if let's say Islam wins, and I think he's gonna be a pretty consistent and pretty looking for fights and things that'll make money. So.
And I mean, let's be honest. Also, if Volk wasn't moving up, Dariush would be fighting Islam in probably the first quarter of 2023. But they're doing the double champ thing,
and that's fine. Whatever. Yeah. You know how they love that. So I mean, now speaking of the devil, Islam, what's next for him? What happens now?
All right. So right now, I don't know if you've noticed, he's ranked number 2 on the pound for pound list.
Yeah, I noticed.
I think that's extremely exaggerated.
You think so?
You can't just put him at number 2 just because he beat Charles Oliveira. The guy's very dominant. I think he has ways to go before he makes his way up that list.
I think that list has less to do with who you're beating and more on the actual fights you're putting out.
Just how dominant you are, I would say, as a fighter, and how well you hold your own.
Yeah.
I think they probably moved him up to 2 just so that they could market this February card a
lot
better.
Yeah.
Number 1 versus 2.
Exactly. Who's the pound for pound goal?
Yeah. I think he's gonna, continue dominating in not just the pound for pound rankings, but in the lightweight division.
Yeah.
I think he's going to beat Volk. I think, the more I think about that fight, the more I go back and forth on how high of a chance I think Volk has. I think Volk is the best MMA, all-around fighter that the UFC has. I think he's the complete package in all areas. Just going back a couple years ago, they used to call him, the wrestler with a big right hand. He's clearly shown that he's not just that. I think this fight in February is going to be huge. But ultimately, Islam's going to hold him down, and I think he's probably going to submit him. And he's going to retain that lightweight belt. And he's going to keep running through that division, I feel. I think he'll probably get that February fight, and then maybe another one towards the end of the year. I know he practices Ramadan, so there's a portion of the year that he can't fight. But
I really do think... for 2023, I just think Islam remains champ. And that's my take on it.
Yeah.
He's going to take out a few names, but he'll fight 2, maybe 3 times this year. And I think when we're talking on a 2023 recap, we're going to say, Islam is still lightweight champ. That's my take.
Yeah, I think he's going to be champ for years to come. I don't think a lot of people...
I had a take earlier, and I don't know if anybody agrees or disagrees with me, but I think he's going to go out on top, just like Khabib did. I don't know about retiring early. It's very possible, but I think we're going to have Islam dominating for a good 2 years.
Yeah, even circling back to that GOAT list, I think if he continues to dominate at lightweight and hold way more defenses than Khabib.
Yeah, he needs... Give me 6 defenses and real names, which obviously like right now he's about to fight Volk. He's already beat Charles for the belt. Give me a few more names, and I already have him up there with Khabib, which sounds crazy. And then I guess
he's only 31, so
yeah, he's there. But remember, these guys also, once they start making money, and they've put everything they have into this sport. Him and Khabib, and it's what they do. But they're also very respectful of their culture. Like, let's say a family member says, "Hey, it's time to go." His wife says, "Hey, give it up," and this, and they'll do it and respectfully and just start coaching. They're exhausted. Those guys give it all they have. And we only see a short portion of it because, like even Khabib, by the time we saw him and we're like, oh, who's Khabib? He was almost ready to retire. And it's crazy, but hopefully Islam lasts a little bit longer. And then last but not least, let's touch upon Francis Ngannou. What happens to him in 2023?
Well, I want to be optimistic here. I do think he's going to stay with the UFC. I think his next fight is going to be the winner of John Jones versus Curtis Blades.
Okay.
I think he's probably not going to be ready in time for a March card. I think they were targeting UFC 285 in early March. Yeah. I don't think he's going to be ready.
Yeah.
I think the stakes are too high, and the guy, whether you hate it or love it,
Diva.
He knows what he's doing.
Diva.
He's taking his time. He's taking all the time he needs to come back on his terms. That's why the UFC is not very happy, I guess, with his approach to it because they want to keep putting up fights.
Yeah.
The heavyweight division has been stalled.
And he's holding it up, yeah. And it's like, how many interim titles are we going to have for the heavyweight division? Like, you're active if you're not. And we got guys who are hungry. And Sergey's a monster. Sergey's going to come in and start causing real issues for everybody. Yeah. And let me tell you something. Cyril Gane will be champion in 2023. I didn't put him there, but Cyril Gane is going to be champion of the heavyweight division. That's my take, and I'm going to have to come back to this YouTube podcast, and I'm going to have to, rub it in everyone's face. Cyril Gane will be champion in 2023. Mind you, this is January 2nd.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to disagree with that one. I don't think he's gonna win it just because I think he's gonna have to see Pavlovich, probably for like number one contender, and I think Pavlovich is gonna stop him. I think a fight between John Jones and Ngannou, I think Jones wins. And then I think Pavlovich probably beats both of them. Either one.
Wow, so you think
I'm holding him in high regard after that UFC Orlando showing.
The last two showings, he's taking out juggernauts. He's taking out monsters.
It was just questionable his fight against
Derek Lewis.
They thought it was an early stoppage.
Was it when you watch it? No. He freaking went down quick. Yeah. His face was down.
He protecting the fighter really quickly. But
that was gonna end sooner rather than later. And then Tai Tuivasa,
he didn't even have a chance.
I can't believe that happened that way. That was impressive. And that's why Sergey got my attention. And think about it. Gane went to battle with Tai Tuivasa, even though he picked him apart. Mm-hmm. But it took him a while. Now this guy Sergey's coming at you like a freight train. Then what? Yeah. And mind you, he's going at a building with a freight train. But Tai Tuivasa is he's gonna stand there and bang. He has a chin. For him to go out like that was crazy. So I think Sergey is definitely a problem. But I don't know. I really think Cyril Gane is the most technical fighter in the UFC in the heavyweight division. I think he has the most complete game in the heavyweight division. So
I don't disagree. I just think his ground game was not where I expected it was. I thought it was a lot better than.
Yeah, no. Well, we saw that against Francis,
Yeah.
But I don't think he's gonna have that issue with Sergey. Sergey and him are gonna battle it out. If he starts abusing his body, utilizes his leg kicks,
and I think Sergey hits very hard and very accurate. So I don't like Gane's chances in that. If I'm being honest.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm scared of Sergey, and I like him a lot. But I've wanted Gane to be champ for about a year and a half already, and I just want it to come true this year. I think he's good enough for it to happen. So that's my take.
But what do you think happens between Francis and John?
I don't think that happens. And I've been saying that, and nobody's going to like that take. Francis Ngannou and John Jones are not fighting anytime soon. It's been too much BS for the last 4 months. They're like, and it's almost like the rumors and whoever's inside the UFC, and it's like, it's coming out. They're going to announce it. We're doing it here. We're doing it in March. It's January. We haven't heard anything. There's a reason for that. Yeah. And it has to do with compensation for Francis Ngannou. It has to do with injuries. And I just... knowing the history that Francis has had with his negotiations and what he wants from the UFC, I could just see him not thinking the risk is worth the reward. And he wants more money for sure. And maybe the injury's not good enough. I don't know. I'm tired of Francis Ngannou. I've been saying it. The guy's great. Nothing personal. It's just like you're holding up a division and the fans hate that. So he's a great fighter. He's a great champion. I just wish he'd fight.
Do you think the UFC is going to strip him of the belt?
They have to They just gotta. I think you gotta release him. Then I think he can't be in the UFC anymore. It's just like you're not signing with us. You're done because he's not gonna come back. And then you're like, this is what the second time you're gonna we're gonna put it on pause because of you. So I think that's like a huge decision for the UFC because if they strip Ngannou, you're not getting Francis in the UFC anymore.
It's a big decision for him as well because he knows that the best competition is exactly where he's at.
But he can make a paycheck, man. The one is handing out paychecks. Yeah. The one is and let me tell you something. Maybe they pay Francis enough, but you have Francis Ngannou headlining for the one, and you get more views for sure. That's a big name.
Or even like a boxing bout versus like Wilder or something.
Yeah, something stupid like that. Yeah, I hate the idea of that, but I could see that happening.
Yeah.
But realistically, I don't know. I just don't think it's going to happen. And I think that's going to conclude our actual UFC podcast. So this was our 3rd episode. We're actually going to handle some questions now on TikTok. So guys, thank you. Don't forget to please like, subscribe, and definitely share this video. I had to say that in the beginning. That's how you get them. But we're taking off here. We're trying to get everything done a little better. We're working with what we have, but it's been a lot of fun, and we're gaining quite a few fans on TikTok, and we're going to start growing a page. I'm going on to Instagram too, and I think that's going to help us out a lot. But other than that, always a pleasure. Aramis out, sir.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Till the next time, 2023 is going to be a good year for the UFC, so take care.